Hello, this is me, Laura Popplow. I'm a participatory designer and researcher from Europe. My position has grown from a journey through the fields of participatory and site-specific art, media architecture, political activism, and participatory design. Specifically, the community of participatory design has offered me a vivid and critical group of practitioners and researchers willing to re-ask their own assumptions of doing design and research. So I would like to invite you all to the Participatory Design Conference taking place in Manzinales, Colombia, and for sure online in 2 weeks. I will talk now about the topic of participatory transformations and the imagination of common otherness or multiplicity, which was also a topic of my PhD, which I just currently finished. So the topic of my presentation are the frictions of participatory transformations and a concept that I developed through my own design experiments and reflections of political concepts, especially the dichotomy minority versus majority, which is still also at the core of most participatory practices. Looking at our planet and the mess we are in right now, one could really ask for the manager. And this perspective is still the most widespread even in transformation sciences. But I would like to invite you here to consider not management as the most daring question of transformations, but the question of how to make transformations as democratic, diverse, and participatory as possible. And therefore I will propose to consider imaginations and the cultivation of otherness as key factors, especially in design. My own understanding of design was changed first through a series of collaborative projects in urban space. But I was challenged even more in my assumptions through my experience of working with fungi. In a series of experiments between 2010 and 2014, I worked with the material capacities of fungal mycelium in architecture and design, exhibited and developed an open source greenhouse, among other things and artifacts. And I also run a lot of public engagement, cultivation workshops in very diverse and also challenged communities. My understanding of design as an open process between experimentation, collaboration, and co-creation got challenged deeply through the long-term engagement with fungi as collaborators in the design process. I started to see that the most interesting things happened not as something planned, but emerged from the correspondence with workshop participants, materials, and the agency of the growing fungi. Like here, for example, the small mushroom growing from a glove that was overgrown by mycelium. And this was really a nice serendipity moment of this fruiting body of the mushroom growing there. In two longer commitments with an urban and a rural community centering on collaborative fungi cultivation, I started to see the parallels between the fungi's ability to create life-enabling networks for their surrounding and my own care for and with the communities I involved in. I started to realize that co-creation is not always only a joyful act of creating together, but involves also rejection, like participants, for example, leaving behind the fungi they were supposed to grow at home, as in this shelf here. And it also involves grief when you as a designer realize that you do not only have to let go the authorship of your work, but also your assumptions of what good participation should look and feel like. So I reframed my practice in retrospect, parallel to fungi activities. the emerging of fruiting bodies, their caring with trees, for example, and other living beings in the soil, and their acts of letting go, as in the fungal activities of feeding on dead organic materials or in spore liberation, like the spore traces you can see here on the shelf. So trying to grasp my work with fungi, I stumbled upon the difficulty of finding the right terminology for it. Others are not necessarily non-humans, nor should they be read as other than normal. I started to call the necessarily different counterparts with which we relate in making others in order to distinguish them from the concept of non-humans or more than humans. Both are notions that presume the human primacy, but they also seem to forget about the differences of human actors by unifying them under the umbrella term of the human. I therefore follow the proposal of Rancière to understand equality as a supposition in a world of differences. If we place equality as an assumption, not an aim, we also could read majority as an assumption and not an aim. This is where Deleuze and Guattari's political thinking starts, and the fictive figure of majority versus minority, a dichotomy they propose to contrast with it by becoming minoritarian of everybody. This idea is closely connected to the principle of multiplicity, a form of common otherness of all being and knowing. We are all other. So, what happens if we understand multiplicity and equality as suppositions? How can we contrast a centered design practice with the perspective of common otherness? In 2015, I organized both local and global hackathon event called Cycle Hack with my students in Wuppertal. The most irritating moment of the whole process was a conflict with a part of the local cycling activists, with which we initially planned to collaborate. They attacked us through social media activities and by non-participation, a circumstance which made the conflict nearly impossible to handle. My first reaction was to read this conflict as a conflict between designerly and activist practice. My second thought was that our designerly intervention provoked a kind of rearticulation of the issue of cycling in the local context. It produced a necessary counter-perspective, a contingency that caused a political positioning on both sides, both the designers and the activists. But it was not until I understood the otherness in the conflict not only as a contrast of different positions, but as a conflict of different temporality, a contrast of the slow construction of activist practice situated in the local political context and the approach of a global hackathon, which establishes a strong temporal regime favoring quick mediated action and thereby also excluding other temporalities and local action. Mapping the qualities of designing with fungi to the hackathon experience helped me to avoid an effect of othering the activist practice and to emphasize instead a need to work with different coexisting temporalities and transformations. I propose, therefore, that designing for decentered pluriversal transformations requires to design with hesitation and presence of others whose articulations are never fully translatable. It requires to acknowledge design's own temporal regimes as present, for example, in design's orientation towards a linear, better future, or the practice of fast prototyping for solutions. Designing with imaginations of otherness means to open up for the contingency of multiple solutions and to make time to care with multiple coexisting temporalities. Thank you.